Welcome to Two Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin reporting live because the show is live. So I'm always reporting live. Very grateful to you for joining this evening. And we've got something special for you. It's called The Diner. I previewed it in the Substack, and some of you got that. Maybe some of you did not. Whether you're watching live here on watching on YouTube or X or here on the Two Way platform, you're in for a special treat. Our partner, David Burrell, and his colleagues at WIC have come up with an incredible idea about how to sample public opinion, think about public opinion, and think about how people think about issues, particularly when there's something they might disagree with. But it's very much in the spirit of Two Way, which is to expose people to new ideas, new perspectives. And even if they don't agree and change their mind to go from disagreeing with something to agreeing, they have greater understanding of the people in the country who disagree with them. And that's a lot of what our conversations here are supposed to be about. Peace, love, and understanding, and presumption of grace, openness to ideas, where you don't treat someone who disagrees with you as an enemy or someone to mock, but rather to learn from them and to be appreciative of the fact that part of why the country's so divided is because we have different perspectives about things. So tonight is the premiere episode of The Diner. And David's going to present some data. We're going to walk you through what's special about this research. We'll talk about the issue of Robert F. Kennedy and his position on vaccines. We have a couple of doctors who will be familiar to you if you're regular viewers of this platform, who will weigh in as well. And then we're going to want to hear from you. So you're welcome to ask questions about other stuff tonight, but particularly interested in people who want to ask questions about vaccines and Bobby Kennedy's view. Of course, he's been nominated to be head of HHS. Will his point of view, long expressed, the skepticism on vaccines, will that be the policy of this administration? We shall see. But it's certainly something of great debate in the country, and we'll get to that in a minute. Today in Washington, two big things occurred. One is the funeral for President Carter. We'll get to that. A lot of interesting things from that. But also a vote in the Senate to allow a bill to proceed, the Laken Riley Act, related to the question of prosecution of people who commit crimes in this country who are here illegally. Big news there is that Democrats overwhelmingly voted to allow the bill to proceed, so-called cloture, which if they want to stop the action, they could vote against cloture and the bill would die if it didn't have enough votes to proceed, 60 votes. This is significant because many people believe this will be a model for how the Trump administration over the next few months can pass bills out of the House, as the Laken Riley Act did, and then send it over to the Senate and basically try to convince Democratic senators that part of why they lost the last election was because the party had moved too far to the left. And so you can see a bunch of bipartisan victories potentially along the same dynamics here. This was overwhelming. I believe only 9 Democratic senators voted against cloture. Amongst those who voted to go forward with the bill, hoping to amend it, but they're not necessarily going to get that opportunity, were Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate. So this is extremely important as we look to the question of whether Democrats will vote to support things supported by the Republicans in Congress and by the Trump administration. It's something to watch, and we will be watching it. On the fires today, continue to hear extraordinary stories of loss. Thankfully, not very much loss of life still, but extraordinary destruction of personal property, entire neighborhoods destroyed, both residential and commercial. One of my friends today just sent me heartbreaking pictures of his house, which I visited in Pacific Palisades, just gone, and real questions about the capacity people will have to rebuild. This afternoon, the president and the vice president held an event in Washington to talk about the fires. Let's listen to a little bit of what they said. Roll number 4, please.
I'm going to turn it over now to the vice president before we go on to the folks in the various cabinet positions as well as agencies that control these issues. Madam Vice President, I know you're directly affected, so you fire away. No pun intended.
Indeed.
All right. So, I know where her house is. Based on where her house is, it's certainly potentially problematic for her. One person whose residence burnt to the ground, number 5, please, not owned by this person, but the renter, Hunter Biden, who lives in Los Angeles area and rented this house, which, as you can see here, has now been destroyed. So incredibly sad story. And again, I'm in regular contact with my friends who live out there and colleagues, and it's not over yet. And And we see life-changing events all over the country, natural disasters in particular, where people's homes are destroyed. This one is getting a lot of attention in part because there are a lot of rich people affected, but also because entire neighborhoods are gone, and because this is not a normal area, it's extremely expensive to rebuild there. Many people are assuming they will not go back to where they live. Their homes are gone, but they're not planning to rebuild. And so, who's going to buy those lots and develop these areas, these extremely iconic areas of Southern California, of the Los Angeles area? Unknown at this point, and it's going to be years in the making. Of course, there's still political questions about it. All right, Jimmy Carter's funeral. We talked about this morning on the morning meeting. The fact that you had the President Biden and the 4 living ex-presidents all there. As far as we know, they've never all been together in an event. You also had some of the living vice presidents there, and I think all the living vice presidents: Pence, Quayle, Gore. I think that's it. And of course Joe Biden. Remarkable tableau. Just the picture itself, incredible. But in addition to the picture, a bunch of stuff happened both before the service began and during the service. Now, you don't want to read stuff in. If you're a journalist or you're a responsible observer, you don't want to look at something and say, well, that's clearly what happened there. But some of these things that happened seem unmistakable and just extraordinary and consistent with what we suspect in some cases about the relationships, but in other cases, quite surprising. So let's look at this. Number 2, please. And we start with just, here's the sort of wide tableau here. You can see the front row is the current president, vice president, and their spouses. The second row is the former presidents and their spouses, although Michelle Obama is not there. And then behind the former presidents is the former vice presidents. Mike Pence, there's Mrs. Pence, there's Al Gore. You can't see it in this shot, but next to Al Gore were the Quayles, Dan and Marilyn Quayle. So now, this got a lot of attention this morning. President Obama and President Trump, before the service started, talked up a ton, and you can see it seemed very friendly. Here's former President Bush coming in. Watch how he greets Barack Obama. This is kind of hilarious, very Bushian. Watch it, there it is again, taps him like a little macho thing. All right, now here's Trump, Gore, Pence, and Karen Pence. Now, as far as I know, this is the first time the Pences have come face to face with the Trumps in a while. Here you see President Trump comes in, Al Gore stands up, Mr. President-elect, Mr. President shakes his hand, Mike Pence stands up, handshake from Donald Trump. Karen Pence, handshake from Melania. Karen Pence, not so much. She stays seated. I think she probably not totally keen on the fact that someone tried to kill her husband. All right, Kamala Harris, Jill Biden. Okay, there have been reports of frostiness between them. The Harris, Vice President Harris seated first. Here comes the Bidens. They sit down, and not a lot of greets there. Now, some people say it's a funeral. You're not supposed to be like glad handing, but that just, to a lot of people, that seems, ugh, ugh. All right, now, here is, is there one more? Yeah. No. Is there one more? Well, just keep rolling.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
yes. All right. So here's Vice President Harris looking over her shoulder, right? And look what she sees. She sees chumminess between her friend Barack Obama and President Trump. Now, again, maybe she's just whatever, but she didn't seem, based on my read of that, she didn't seem totally delighted with the fact that chumming around. And again, I mentioned Dan Quayle, Marilyn Quayle were there. There they are on the left. And that's the vice presidential row. Just giving you a look at the vice presidential row. They were seated before the presidents because of protocol. All right. One more thing. I just want to show you a little bit of President Biden, who gave the eulogy. As many of you know, President Joe Biden endorsed Jimmy Carter early on, one of the first people to endorse Jimmy Carter when he ran for president from outside of Georgia, and they were very close. And so President Biden was appropriately giving the eulogy. There were a bunch of great speeches. The sons of Walter Mondale, the son of Gerald Ford, read the eulogies that their fathers had written before they passed away for them. I once spent an afternoon at actually Senator Klobuchar's house when she was running for the Senate with Mondale and Carter, and their relationship was lovely. I've just really the real deal. They really liked each other. Let's play a little bit of President Biden from today.
In April 2021, Jill and I visited Jimmy and Rosalynn on a warm spring day down in Plains, Georgia. We wanted to see them. Rosalind met us at the front door with her signature smile. Together, we entered a home that they had shared for almost 77 years of marriage. An unassuming red brick ranch home that reflects their modesty more than any trappings of power. We walked into the living room where Jimmy greeted us like family. That day, just the four of us sat in the living room and shared memories that spanned almost 6 decades. A deep friendship that started in 1974. I was a 31-year-old senator, and I was the first senator outside of Georgia, maybe the first senator, to endorse his candidacy for president. It was an endorsement based on what I believe is Jimmy Carter's enduring attribute: character, character, character. Because of that character, I believe, is destiny. Destiny in our lives, and quite frankly, destiny in the life of the nation.
Okay.
It's an accumulation.
It was a lovely event. It really was. And you know, President Carter, we talked about this before, presidents get to choose from an a la carte menu of the kind of memorials they want, the kind of services they want. President Carter chose just about everything available to a former president for Washington, but he also had bookended the Washington portion of the memorials with, in Georgia, two services in Georgia, and the second part of the services in Georgia that will end with his body being buried next to his longtime wife, Rosalind Carter, is occurring now back in Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, David Burrell. How's that for a transition? David Burrell lives in Georgia, and he is my polling partner. Wick is done work with two-way now for months, almost since our beginning. Focus group polling. David polled, you may remember, it was part of our presentation we did for the show All About Pennsylvania during the election, and polled both Key County as well as the state, and did his normal extraordinarily accurate work in figuring out where the race stood at that point, which matched up pretty closely to where it ended up in Election Day. And now David joins us to talk about our new series, as I said, The Diner. We're super excited about it. This grows out of David's ability to deal with qualitative and quantitative data, that's both polling and focus groups, and listening to people's voices, and bringing voices together from around social media, from research, and then from two-way. And that's the part we're going to depend on you all on. We're going to have some folks here, 2 doctors joining us that we've asked to come join, but also all of you. And I'd love for people who want to talk about this issue, as Sir David explains it, to raise your hand. And if you do want to talk about other stuff, we can. But I prefer tonight if you focus your questions on this issue of Bobby Kennedy and his view of vaccines. And whether you agree with him or not, we're going to want to hear from you. So watch and learn, as we like to say. David, welcome. Thank you for this. We're so excited. First, just talk about what is, everybody knows about polls and focus groups. What's different about the Diner that is going to provide kind of a 360-degree immersive experience? Explain why it's different than what people see elsewhere.
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 reasons why I'm really excited about the Diner. And although Mark and I do have a shared love of all things polling and focus groups, what really the Diner came out of feedback, specific type of feedback we got from the other two-way shows. People pretty much saying, man, what we're all kind of feeling, that just the idea of the anxiety and dread that the side that, the other side might win the election, and just how everyone was feeling until they found the two-way platform and they were actually able to listen to and engage with people they disagreed with, and how that lowered the temperature. And so really the Diner kind of came out of not only our love for research, but wanting to really lean into that and expand on that, but do it on specific issues, and do it by combining a lot of research, which we can only really do, which is only really possible because of this two-way platform. And so, you're not going to, and I'll put my slides up here in a second, if that's all right, Mark, but, and kind of talk about the methodology, but what hopefully everyone's going to really enjoy and engage with what they experience here, because, the two-way platform itself, I'm a pollster and I see it as, it's qualitative research. It's an immersive research experience. And so that's going to be a big part of it. And I'm excited today because I get to walk y'all through our first issue that we really lean into and say, hey, can we show people what other people feel about this issue, what their views are, and kind of find a common ground in.
Okay. So David explained it really well, but I bet some of you still don't quite get it because it's different. It's new. So what David's going to do now is he's going to walk through his slides explaining the first edition of the diner. It pertains to this question of Senator, it's not Senator Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy Jr. and his view on vaccines. David will walk through the deck. We'll bring in our two doctors, again, familiar faces, the two-way community, and then we'll open up to you for your questions about this. And expect more of these, and maybe even one coming soon on a topic that I'm super excited about. So, David, all yours.
All righty. All right, Mark, we good?
Yes, looks great to me.
Looks
All
good.
yours.
Okay.
There's our first of all, there's our logo, which the folks at Wick did. Spectacular as far as I'm concerned, because you can see there's an outline of a diner plate. Makes me just want to order some home fries. All right, David, you go.
Very good. I'll do a quick recap of that methodology, then we'll get into our first issue. So again, the diner serving conversations like no other on the issues America should discuss. What is really unique is that we bring secondary research, we bring a bunch of quantitative research, which we're about to go through. And then this two-way platform itself allows us to actually hear voices, hear responses in a qualitative way. You're not going to see this anywhere else, especially in an immersive experience like what we're doing on this platform. And the last thing that's different about it is we're going to make the data available to everyone. Everything's going to be available. We want everyone else's opinions, look at the data, come back with your feedback, and we can kind of continue the conversation. But with that, like I said, we want to lean into a specific issue, and the issue today is RFK's proposal for vaccine safety reform. So we polled a representative sample of registered voters in the United States, and we wanted to find out where they stand on this proposal. So specifically, RFK has said multiple times, we don't know what the exact proposal will be if he gets approved, but that he plans to establish new standards for vaccine safety testing at the NIH and approval processes at the FDA, requiring new vaccines to undergo placebo-controlled safety trials and long review periods, and subjecting existing vaccines to new long-term safety studies. So we asked America if they support or oppose this, and we're going to show you those results in a second, and among other things. But first, I want to kind of set the table here and just show you where, generally speaking, America is on the issues of vaccines and on RFK. So first off, they generally think vaccines are safe, with 35% saying very safe and 40% saying somewhat safe. They also are 50-50 on RFK Jr. With a net -2 approval in this poll. Maybe he hovers around 50 on other polls we do. And in addition to that, not being, superbly popular, his credibility rating as a source for vaccine information, as a credible source of vaccine information, is not high either. It's only 37% saying somewhat or very credible. So that's right in between Donald Trump and the mainstream media from credibility on this subject. And yet, and this is what makes RFK and this issue so interesting, when people were exposed to the specific proposal for vaccine safety reform, from what we know from what he said prior and since being nominated or selected by Trump, is popular with a positive 26%, which is higher than I expected when we actually went into this project. Net support of vaccine for his vaccine safety proposal as we know it today.
And David, just to clarify, that's net 26 support for both parts of the proposal to both existing and new vaccines, right?
Yeah, it was grouped together, right?
Yeah. Okay, just making sure. Go ahead.
And that's a good point, because in the future we do with this, we like to keep it as specific as possible. But right now we're just predicting what the proposals will be, so we're going to kind of do our best. More so, if you want to look at why this is interesting, and I think it's thematic about some of the political realignments going on, is that positive net support is really across all demographic groups with some pretty loud numbers, as well as the political and the ideological segments. With really interesting numbers, with a plus 59% for independents and plus 19% for moderates. So again, very interesting issue. People trust vaccine or think vaccines are relatively safe, not sure about RFK, don't find it a credible source, but the proposal itself is measuring very highly when people are asked specifically about it. So what we get to do now is what I'm most excited about, is we have sourced the viewpoints through a lot of secondary and some qualitative research that you may hear from people who on this issue of why they support or oppose it. We take the viewpoints of those who support it, and we expose those that oppose it to those viewpoints and vice versa, and we ask them what they think about it. So that's what we're going to get into next. We ultimately have 8 viewpoints, but we're only going to go through 4 right now, and everyone can access the rest of it. Mark will send out the link afterwards. So let's take a look at Denise's viewpoint. These are real views for people, right? But so Denise supports RFK's proposal. She says pharma companies account for nearly 50% of the FDA's revenue. They also contribute billions of dollars to medical journals, the CDC, medical associations, and politicians. And if you're wondering why you haven't heard of this news, it's because pharma companies provide over 60% of the mainstream media's ad revenue. It's a masterclass in corruption, and we must stop believing them when they say, trust me, I am on your side. This is safe. So, hold on a sec. So again, we exposed people who don't support the proposal to this viewpoint. We said, have you ever heard or considered this before? This is what's so amazing. That's why I think Mark's platform's great and the feedback was great. 64% said never heard or considered this viewpoint before. Do you find it reasonable? Only 40% of people who, again, disagree with his proposal, don't support it, say that this is not a reasonable view. Likewise, 41% said it's not impactful. So what's unique about this is interesting is people's responses when you see others' viewpoints of those who oppose. And again, 64% never heard or considered it before. So let's take a look at the other side on, this subject. So Adam opposes it because the institutions protect us, kind of keeping in the same theme and angle here. It's not hard to believe that a pharmaceutical company puts profit for people. That's what Adam says. But for this reform to be necessary, you're essentially saying that the FDA, the CDC, medical associations, medical journals, medical schools, and even our personal doctors are all collectively either ignorant or actually complicit in promoting dangerous medicines. I just can't see that being true. If large-scale testing reform were truly needed to change the way we test vaccines, we would know. And again, these are like polished versions of summarizing what you might hear in a focus group, but what we're finding online. So there's Denise's scores, right? And we add them all up, create a calculation to create those scores on the side. So 52% never heard or considered that viewpoint before. That's a lot of people. Only 17% says it's not reasonable for why he has an alternative viewpoint as them, alternative stance, the opposite stance to them. And look at the impact score as well. I can't read it because something's covering my screen, but very high impact score. Ultimately, like I said, we run equations and we give them these diner scores on these plates here, so you can kind of start to measure all these viewpoints. So
Dave, just walk through. What does 36 mean? What does 43 mean?
Sure. So 36, let's go back up on this slide real quick. Really, if you take the novelty, the reasonability, and the impact, we have an equation where we kind of combine that all together and weight it, and we give you an ultimate score for that viewpoint. Again, if no one had ever heard your viewpoint before and they find it very reasonable and very impactful, you're going to have a high diner score. And so that's how we calculate those. And again,
okay, so go to the next slide. So Adam's point of view was more impactful overall than Denise's, right? That's what that means.
Correct. That's correct. And that was actually thematic on this one, Mark. And part of it is because there's a lot of Democrats and people, a lot of Democrats and independents, again, who aren't big fans of RFK, but did support the proposal. They're just more open to it, I think. So, all right, we're gonna do one more section here, and then and open it up. And again, everyone can access the rest of the data on the website afterwards. So mandates. Brandy says mandates are a problem. John says work on the problem. So Mandy's viewpoint is hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease, one that my 5-year-old does not have and would not pose a danger to other students, even if he did. But for my son to go to kindergarten, we either have to lie about a religious exemption or find a doctor to falsify a medical exemption. Even a small chance of vaccine injury outweighs the 0% chance that my child has hep B. If we're mandating nonsense like this for our kids to go to school, then no standard of testing is too high. 68% never heard or considered that viewpoint before. Very similar on the reasonability. And I know I need to move quickly on these, so I'm just going to pass through them and everyone can re-access all this data later. But ultimately, you're still seeing, as partisan and as divisive as some of these issues are, once you actually listen to someone else's viewpoint, a lot of people have never heard it and do find it reasonable and impactful. It just doesn't happen that often, on the web. So John, last one we'll do here is John opposes RFK's proposal because it doesn't work on the right problem. So to me, the bigger issues people seem to be getting upset about regarding vaccines is mandates, not safety testing. I'm okay with proposals to reform mandates. I even agree that it doesn't make sense for kids to be required to get vaccines for STDs to go to elementary school. But large-scale testing changes for all vaccines, both new and old, is a very risky disruption to something I think is very important for the world. And it wouldn't necessarily solve the problem that that state and local governments are being recommended to mandate vaccines that don't provide a practical benefit to kids, even if they are mostly safe. And this, by the way, is something you can read a lot about. And so you see in the other viewpoints too, that, how disruptive this is to something very, very important is really a viewpoint that you hear a lot across multiple sources. So that's very thematic across a lot of different, even if they approach it differently. So John, novelty score 51, had not heard or considered that before. That had, I think, the highest reasonability score of every single one we tested. And then also very high impact score. So like on the other issue, the head-to-head, his viewpoint actually got a higher Dyna score. So I'm going to stop there. There's other viewpoints. You can kind of see all their scores here. You can be able to access it on the website. Mark's going to send a link out. Mark's team will send a link out. But this is an interesting approach where, like I said, we wanted to actually start bringing these views together and exposing people who had never heard or considered it before and who have opposing beliefs, say, how do they respond to this? What views were impactful? What really resonated? And then start the conversation on these key issues, which we'll continue to do with more issues, hopefully, in the coming weeks.
Okay, David, thank you. Now, this is the portion of Sprockets where we dance. No, this is the portion of this program where we're going to bring in our two doctors because I want to hear from them. And then we're going to want to hear from you. And the whole idea of what we're trying to do with the diner is to turn this format, this platform of two-way, into an opportunity for you all to weigh in on these topics and to try to create a little bit of a conversation around the single issues. And again, we're experimenting. So you're part of the experiment. We hope you'll participate on this question. So if you'd like to talk about these issues of vaccines, about mandates, about more further research on existing vaccines, any piece of this, we'd love to get you involved. So please
Mark,
raise your hand.
I had one thing there, Mark, before we get in,
Yeah.
specifically related to that, because I saw a couple of things on the chat, which I appreciate the good comments. But that's one of the great things about two ways. We have this quantitative level data, qualitative scale. And I saw some people say, well, what if the facts are wrong? Well, these are viewpoints, and now we get to hear counter viewpoints. Let's hear the counterpoints and talk about it. Because certainly, that's how viewpoints work. It's based on your perception and the information you have. And that's exactly what we're seeing online. But so please bring that to the conversation. Like if directly challenge, that's what allows us to dive deeper and really get these cool insights.
All right. So David is a data scientist, very smart. I'm a political reporter. We're not that smart. But here are two people who graduated from medical school, obviously quite smart. Nan Hayworth was a Republican member of Congress, is a doctor. And Dr. John, I'm going to try once again to pronounce your name correctly, Nikonchuk.
I'll give you a hint, like two more first names, Nick and Chuck. Three people, John, Nick, and Chuck.
Nick and Chuck. Okay, John, Nick, and Chuck. Some of you will recognize Dr. John. Sometimes he shaves, sometimes he doesn't. But he's been part of the two-way community for a while and has spoken whenever he's been on so eloquently. So although he's not a political person, he's a doctor who thinks a lot about public health and public policy. And we couldn't be happier to have both of you here as part of this. Dr. Hayworth, I'm going to start with Dr. John only because he's on call tonight. And so we could lose him at any time. So Dr. John, first I want you to talk about not the issues. I want to get to the issues in a second. But what do you think of sort of talking about public opinion on these things? Do you think this is something, in your experience, on people's minds?
I certainly do, and I am in the minority amongst my coworkers, and so I'm used to having these conversations. And I think this is one that affects your own children, and just in my friend groups, inside and outside of medicine, inside and outside of work, this is really, really one of the many issues that RFK has brought up that is coming up just in day-to-day conversation. And I think I do want to lead with, I genuinely believe that the vast majority of people on both sides of this debate do actually really care about kids and do really, really want to keep their kids safe. I don't take the Chris Murphy view that RFK is wanting to kill kids, for example, which he tweeted out. And so I do want that. That's why I love this platform, because I do think everyone that is thoughtfully approaching this is actually doing it because they really, really care about kids. And you saw the difference in the parents versus non-parents in that poll, right? I'm a 37-year-old male who has kids, so I guess I'm following my demographic trends in my net favorability of RFK. I will say also, just an introduction, that my support for RFK had almost nothing to do with his stance on vaccines. It was his sort of three other tentpole issues around chronic illness more broadly. But I have done a lot of research on his positions and this issue because it comes up so frequently.
Yeah. All right. Stay with us. Dr. Hayworth. For a lot of people, it's a little scary to think that these issues are on debate. They'd like to think that doctors and the medical infrastructure in our federal government knows this vaccine's safe. If this vaccine's not safe, we're not going to give it to your kids. And yet, spurred on by both COVID and Bobby Kennedy, there's now a widespread belief amongst, I would say, tens of millions of Americans. You see all these problems that kids have post-COVID vaccine, and they say, sorry, we just don't trust that these are safe. So just talk about sort of the broad issue of the challenge public policymakers have now in dealing with these issues.
There are a lot of strands to this, and I raised two children in the 1990s to 2000s. So I do understand some of the issues as a parent as well. I think the spur for this was indeed the COVID experience. And there were so many aspects of our nation's experience with COVID, from where did this virus arise to how do we deal with this illness at a time when we didn't even have the option of vaccines, but obviously various forms of potential remedies were being discussed. Some were being prescribed by physicians. There was obviously suppression of information that we know about, suppression of inquiry. So a lot of emotional content around this. And then the COVID-19 vaccines, which were an unusual case. And Dr. John, you can back me up on this or not, but to my knowledge, an unusual case, pretty much a unique case in American medical history, in that these vaccines were given an emergency use authorization. I think perhaps I'm going to correct myself. I think it happened with the swine flu vaccines back in '76, but certainly in the lifetime of millions and millions of Americans, it was certainly a unique situation. So these vaccines were given an emergency use authorization, which really compressed the testing protocol that to the initial point about whether or not vaccines should go through placebo-controlled trials, randomized clinical trials, thorough testing. Most vaccines on the American market actually do undergo, they are required to undergo that kind of testing. So that really shouldn't be an issue. But in terms of the COVID-19 vaccines, it was a telescoped period. Emergency use authorizations kind of never expired, if you will. So now these vaccines have become part of the strong recommendations, if not by many institutions, mandates for adults and even for children. And there is lots of vigorous debate that is supported by valid clinical observations by serious people regarding whether or not different population groups benefit from the vaccine and to what extent. So parents become concerned because RFK Jr., who's gained prominence because of politics, not so much because of his views, but because of Democratic Party politics, if you will. And then he became part of, obviously, this populist movement that prevailed with President Trump. So now his views on vaccines have gotten a lot of his skepticism about whether or not vaccines may cause terrible complications like childhood autism. Is that a complication of childhood vaccine exposure? We have that layered atop these very good questions about whether or not children in particular, my position is children do not need COVID vaccines and shouldn't be receiving them. They need that immunological development, if you will. But those things have all mixed together. And there is, as mentioned, and I'll stop, but a general atmosphere of, with the release of all the evidence that certainly during the Biden administration, the government very much tried to suppress inquiry and speech that Americans should be allowed to have without any question. So I think all those things have come together to create this sentiment that of skepticism, and that we need to shine a bigger light on the vaccine question in general.
John.
Mark, yeah, I'll just add, I think the point around COVID is, as Sean would say, cannot be under or overstated, whichever one Sean decides. Because not only was the COVID vaccine under emergency use authorization, it was the first ever use of a new vaccine technology, the mRNA vaccine. So these had been developed largely around like melanoma and cancer research as a brand new type of vaccine, right? So live virus vaccines, the initial ones, and then dead virus vaccines. Most of the vaccines we know, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, have been one type of vaccine. This was an entirely new vaccine technology. And that is where I think a lot of the concern came around about pushing these out so quickly to every group. And even Dr. Fauci has come out and said, well, actually, we kind of did know that some groups probably didn't nearly need them as much and others did, but we didn't want to confuse people the same way we didn't want to confuse people around masks and around social distancing. And we kind of made it up, the 6 feet thing. And it created this air of confusion, really. I want desperately to trust in institutions. But when it's like the kids that were out of school compared to Sweden, like just did worse. Dr. Fauci said, I made up the 6 foot thing. It's just like, well, when do we believe you and when do we not believe you for a brand new type of vaccine technology that involves messenger RNA? It's telling your cell to make the spike protein of the COVID virus. We don't know how long it's going to make it for, and that's some of the controversy now. Does it keep making it forever? What does the body do with this new information that it's being told to create the spike protein now, rather than being given a version of the virus to make the antibody? So that's just what we don't know. And I don't think anybody really could say at the time that we did know what the longer term risks would be, because it's a brand new technology. And this was all in an era of generalized, as we talked about with Biden's cognitive decline, just not knowing what was real and what was not. I know you talked about the other day, the USA Today interview, and I read that transcript from what was released. And, Biden said, one of his driving missions was, if the US is to lead, we have to be number one in infrastructure, education, and healthcare in the world. Well, right now, have you seen like any of our roads? Have you seen our airports compared to like the Dominican Republic airport? You've seen those high-speed trains in Japan? We're nowhere near it on infrastructure. On education, 26% of 8th graders are proficient in math right now. We just are not at the level that we are being told we're at. When it comes to healthcare, we're 55th in maternal mortality, 54th in infant mortality. We're just not there. And so when we're told we're number one in these things and we're not, when we're told, yeah, we made some stuff up, but believe us on this. And then the last point I'll make is I look at RFK's background, right? Look at the cases that he has won in the past. He was an environmental lawyer, probably the most left-wing person that a lot of Republicans could imagine, right? He went up against companies along the Hudson River that were polluting the river. He went up against Monsanto when it came to glyphosate and Roundup and causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He went up against DuPont, which became that movie Dark Waters, that they were polluting the rivers. So yes, he is coming from a place that he has seen collusion between large corporations and government regulatory bodies that have caused harm to people. And so he's coming at this that now says, yeah, maybe this is also another thing where there could be collusion of some kind. You see Scott Gottlieb going from the head of FDA to Pfizer immediately. Maybe they're chatting, like maybe there's something going on here, especially in a setting which post 1986, there is a liability shield for all vaccines because due to the early 1980s version of the DTP vaccine that was deemed to be unsafe and pulled from the market, vaccine manufacturers said, hey, we can't keep making this public good because we're going to get sued so much that we can't, like this studio can't do this. And so post 1986, I think there's a lot more skepticism. You have a company, I wouldn't hire a plumber who came in and is like, hey, by the way, no matter how this job goes, you have to pay me and you can't sue me. Like, it's just sort of common sense at some point where you're going to question the company that has a liability shield and a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders rather than patients versus the moms who are saying like, hey, my kid like is just different now. And I don't know. I genuinely don't know. You hear Nicole Shanahan talk about it, like moms who are just like wanting answers versus the company with a liability shield with fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. It's like, well, it's not that crazy to be like, maybe we should question it a little bit. My kids got all their vaccines except for COVID. I want that out there. So
Okay. Nan, I want to say something I bet about Bobby Kennedy and the environment, and then we're going
Yeah.
to go to your
yeah,
questions.
she did.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I might have said something that was
Yes.
it
No.
got ranted.
With all respect and with gratitude for that précis, which was thorough. And you're quite right about the many failings in American life that we have to deal with, including, yes, of our health results, despite our massive, the greatest expenditures in the world. Winning a legal case does not necessarily mean that a scientific principle has been either honored or established. The glyphosate connection to cancer being one of them, it's not really at all clear that that is the case. I know that that is in fact scientifically valid. Certainly in the Hudson Valley, and I am, by the way, I support RFK Jr.'s becoming the head of HHS. I think President Trump's nominee will have his feet held to the fire in various ways. And certainly I admire his passion for transparency and accountability. But his contentions about our local nuclear plant were not really borne out by the facts either. That doesn't mean you can't have a successful case, but doesn't render him infallible. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear. And also, just with regard to vaccines, Jay Bhattacharya, who's another nominee, obviously, he's going to head up the National Institutes of Health, has great content online responding to the question of do vaccines contribute to childhood autism? And he cites some very good research that says at least the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, is very reliable evidence indicates it's not associated with autism. Whether or not piling on all those other vaccines contributes to this phenomenon is a question that remains fully to be answered. And obviously, I think RFK Jr. is going to be honed in on that quite vigorously.
All right. We want to bring you in now. I'd love you, Colette, first. Tell us where you are, and then I'd love for you to just weigh in on the basic question of, do you think Bobby Kennedy's right that vaccine regulation should be overhauled, and why? And then if you've got something else on your mind, you'll go there next. But tell us where you are and your thoughts on Bobby Kennedy's macro view. And then again, whatever else is on your mind. And thank you for joining.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I am in Hawaii and I definitely support RFK. I have 3 adult children, so children's health and vaccine were an issue when they were young children. So I did a lot of research on it when they were younger. But my biggest point, and I think what Dr. John was talking about, and then one of the comments from, I think it was Adam maybe, who said, how could there be something complicit between the CDC, the vaccine manufacturers or the pharmaceutical companies and like the government institutions? And you correct me if I'm wrong, but the issue of myocarditis and the COVID vaccine in young men was something that there were rumblings from the data from Israel saying, oh, we're seeing something with young men and myocarditis. The CDC, the pharmaceutical companies denied it at the beginning, probably because they thought it was going to affect the other people getting the vaccine. Well, now, if you go on the CDC's website, they do acknowledge it. And they do acknowledge it, I think, on the boxes of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, that there is a possible net harm to young men. And actually, there's a Dr. Vinay Prasad who does a lot of, I think what he does, he looks at a lot of studies, and he did say that the actual risk of getting the vaccine for young men versus the risk of COVID, there was a net harm to young men getting the COVID vaccine. Right. So it's hard to have faith in our system and the pharmaceutical companies and the CDC and the FDA when they knew this and they held it from the American people. Yep. And my son was one of those people. He was like, he was going to lose his job if he didn't get the vaccine. So that's very frustrating. And I think why people have so much concern and frustration with the way things are.
Colette, do you think Bobby Kennedy has credibility as an advocate for changes in the system?
Yes, I do.
Where do you, what makes you think that? Where does his credibility come from?
Well, I think his history, like Dr. John was saying, he has the Children's Health Defense Fund. He's always fought for children. I don't think that his mission is to like, I just feel like he has always cared about that. A lot of people who don't like him or aren't supportive of him bring up his personal life. And I just don't think you could do that, because if we based everything on someone's personal life or mistakes they've made, I don't know who we'd have in any position or most positions. But I definitely think I don't agree with a lot of some of his environmental views, but as far as children's health, I think he definitely, and like from what I'm hearing, he doesn't want to get rid of the childhood vaccines. He just wants better data. It's just do better testing. Yeah. And then I think that, Nan, you said something about these vaccines have all been tested and gone through rigorous testing. And I don't know if that's true for the Hep B. I heard that there's a lawyer who's working on that right now for an organization called ICANN. And some of the data, they only did testing for like less than a week to see the side effects of Hep B on young children. And like the other woman said, the Hep B in the diner comments, if you really think about giving a 2-month-old, or I think they give it at birth,
close.
Something you can only get that's sexually transmitted or through intravenous drug user, and the mother does not have it, why are we giving this to our newborn babies?
All right, doctors, and then David. Doctor, go ahead. No, and then go ahead.
No, I was going to say, no, it understood completely. And I respect that concern. And, when it comes to accountability, I know that there's been testimony before Congress by an attorney who does pursue legal action regarding vaccines against pharma companies. But re your timeline, Colette, this attorney contended that there was only a very short period of time of observation for some of those vaccines, including hepatitis B. That sounded odd to me. I mean, I know that the official position of the FDA, as far as I know, is that they do have to undergo phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 testing in much the same way that, or certainly analogous to other interventions that are brought to market, drugs and biologics. But that was not the case, as we emphasized with the COVID vaccine. And as Dr. John pointed out, that is a brand new technology, mRNA technology. By the way, what happens to those cells that produce the the mRNA, that follow the mRNA instructions. What's supposed to happen to them is that your body will react to them as though they're foreign cells if they've got that, if they're expressing that little molecule, that spike protein, and then the body's supposed to, attack those too. Now, that's probably part of the reason that we do have this legitimate concern about myocarditis in young men due to whatever specifics of their very vigorous immune response are. And I just want to point out, Chris Kobach, who is the Attorney General of Kansas, is in fact suing Pfizer because part of that 1986 law that held vaccine manufacturers largely harmless for adverse events, so long as they provided the correct evidence to the FDA, is that if they hid evidence, then they would in fact be liable. And Kobach's contention is that in fact through FOIA, it's been revealed that Pfizer did in fact document numerous serious adverse events that were not reported. His contention were not reported to the federal government. So he's suing on that basis, and that is one of our legal recourses. But that's the essence of this, is that we absolutely need to have full information for the American public. Hepatitis B is a very serious disease if you get it, but you get it through blood contact, and agreed that newborns under normal circumstances in the United States are not going to be at high risk for that condition. Parents should be given the option to have their infant receive the vaccine or not.
John, and then David.
Yeah, thank you for all your comments, Colette. I appreciate you being here. And so I will say a couple of things. I'll be quick, but COVID has a secondary liability shield that was passed in addition to the 1986 law. So it's like a whole separate that got renewed again. So there's like another layer of liability shield for the COVID vaccine. I see in the comments, yes, Hep B and Hep C are both blood-borne diseases. So sexually transmitted and or needle shares and or contact with blood. Hep A is not. Hep A is a gastrointestinal disease. Okay, so yes, just for everyone in the comments, we're aware of the differences between the hepatitis. But to pick up on something that Colette said, that also came up in the comments. I would love to be able to fully trust FDA, CDC, but I am also a pain physician in addition to being a pediatric anesthesiologist. I have seen what has happened with OxyContin and the opioid crisis. I have seen the effects of lack of oversight when it comes to dangerous medications, potentially dangerous medications in the case of vaccines, some of them, clearly dangerous medications when it comes to opioids, ticagrelor or Vioxx. Like, the lack of effective oversight has been proven time and again. So yes, I would, again, love to trust my institutions to not be captured by industry. I just don't see evidence to do that at this time. And so
David.
that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you, John. David.
Oh, this is great. So I want to back up and just say from a research standpoint that one of the reasons this is so interesting is because of all the political realignment going on and all the new issues with almost like the new platforms that are being developed in the party. So this is fascinating to listen to people respond to what is effectively becoming a part of a new platform. And so again, Mark, thank you for this show, this platform where we can listen and have these people come on. I want to make a point, because I think as I'm like listening to this, like a pollster, and it's almost like a focus group, you're hearing a lot of maybe confusion and conflicting beliefs or on what is true on, maybe some of the details, and maybe some of that counterpoint is, I like my facts better than your facts. And so I think that's going to be something you'll continue to see. People like their facts for whatever reason. And a lot of times, but as y'all saw in the research though, a lot of people said, yeah, but your viewpoint's reasonable. And I never heard it before. So there's some really interesting stuff going on there. One thing I'd love to get anyone from the crowd, but also anyone who's on the screen here to respond to is a viewpoint we did not actually see, which John, actually, one thing you said common sense was the name of one of the viewpoints. But one thing we did hear a lot about RFK's proposal, and it was in one of the other viewpoints, was this idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Once you start questioning one vaccine, effectively you're reducing the adoption of all vaccines. And so there's a concern of like, okay, if we start to say, hey, we're going to start retesting everything, how the public may respond is not wanting to take the polio vaccine. So we hear the polio vaccine come up a lot. And so anyways, that was because there was a lot of support we saw for, this idea of like, yeah, well, why not do better testing? But then a counterpoint to that, which kind of came up was, well, that can be dangerous too, because you're going to decrease the adoption rate, just like COVID did, because people don't trust the COVID vaccine. The adoption rates of adoption rate, assuming the right word, of the other vaccines have gone down. And so there's that counterpoint to it if you're a big proponent of those vaccines. And so that's something that hasn't come up, but I just wanted to bring up and curious to people's feedback on that. But
we'll jump onto that point in a moment. Colette, I say this with such gratitude. I love how informed you are and calm about it and passionate about it and concerned for all the right reasons. So really grateful to you for coming on and expressing it. I brought on 3 additional people, Colette, and the doctors are staying with us. Enid, Daniel, and Dean brought you on together. We're a little bit up against the clock, but I do want to get some more voices in. So Dean, let's start with you. I want to hear your macro view, hearing the points of view expressed both in John and David's presentation and the others who've already spoken. Where do you stand on these sort of big issues?
Thank you. Like Dr. Hayworth, I raised my kids in the late 90s, early aughts, and I want to trust the professionals that I take when I take them to the pediatrician. I just want to say, which should I take, doc, and move on from there. COVID changed that. And as far as RFK, I don't follow it closely enough. That's why my 2 questions, one to David and then to the doctors. David, the question, the way it was written, did it have RFK in the question itself? Because as I read just one, requiring new vaccines to undergo placebo-controlled safety trials and longer review periods and subjecting existing vaccines to new long-term safety studies. There's nothing, for me, just a layman, there's nothing wrong with that. The minute that you add RFK, then my mind goes to somewhere else. How was the question originally delivered?
that's a great question. And in the future, I'll make that clear. How I put it on the screen is going to be how the survey respondents saw it. So it did include RFK's name in, which is one of the reasons why that's such an interesting paradigm between not a lot of trust as him as a credible source or saying he's a credible source. But at the same time, when they were exposed to that proposal with his name on it, you did have that very high positive 26 net support.
Thank you. Thank you.
But also on this issue, a lot of people, as you said, aren't actually following, even though he's been in the news so much. They don't act, their perception of his policies is more just painted about like what his personality and like the broader strokes, because he's still very relatively new from a policy standpoint.
Dean, hold your question for the doctors, if you would, for just a minute. Enid, could you tell us how you feel about the general question of existing and new vaccines and what the regulation should be like?
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Enid. I'm also a physician. I've been practicing infectious disease and internal medicine for the last 30 years. And I think after hearing everybody talk, and there's so much high suspicion of these vaccines, and some people know that these vaccines do go through a rigorous testing in animals before they're tested in people. And every drug that we use, including vaccines, have some good effects and some bad effects. And some people have very bad effects from X, Y, or Z, including vaccines. And that's just part of the luck of the draw, basically. But we hope that the majority of people don't have bad vaccines and bad reactions. Otherwise, we withdraw the drug or the vaccine. So even the COVID vaccine, the mRNA vaccines, have undergone a lot of testing prior to COVID. Were they called COVID vaccines at that time? No, they were mRNA technology that they were trying to possibly use for, like somebody mentioned, oncology uses or vaccination uses, just a different mechanism, maybe because they're more easily and rapidly developed, but those things were on the shelf prior to COVID. I think after listening to people, maybe what needs to happen is there needs to be a general education of how vaccines are brought to market. I think it's good. I don't support RFK, but I think it's good to ask questions. And I think we need to learn more in general, like the general common knowledge. How is a vaccine brought to market? Like how a bill becomes a law kind of thing.
Yeah, great.
And so people can have more trust in the process. because
concept.
I think
Daniel,
there's,
sorry, Daniel, I apologize.
it's all
Daniel,
right.
what's your overall view of this question of RFK's position?
I don't think anyone is against making vaccines safer. I think all vaccines are not created equal. There are those that have been on the market for a long time. I'm not in favor of the idea of taking vaccines off the market that have a track record of saving lives for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I think making new vaccines as safe as possible is a wonderful plan. I am not in favor of making vaccines mandatory. I think everybody should be able to make the decision for themselves based upon all the data that they're given. And I think COVID is a completely unique situation where the world was in crisis and no one knew what to do. And I personally am very glad that I had the vaccine, and it probably saved my life. So I am very happy that they came up with the vaccine. So I think COVID was just too unique a situation to lump in with other vaccines that are not threatening the entire world at the same time.
Yeah. Daniel, do you think Bobby Kennedy has credibility on these issues?
Do I?
Yeah.
No, I don't think he has credibility. I don't think he doesn't have credibility. I don't really know the man. My problem with the lack of credibility, as soon as you lump everything together, all vaccines are bad. All vaccines are good. You lose me as soon as you generalize everything as good or bad. If RFK were to come out and say, I'm in favor of making vaccines safer, and I will do everything in my power in my job to do that, love it. But he seems too much of a lumping things as good or bad. And I think seeing the gray is almost the dirty word compromise, that there is some gray area in here. Not all things are good and bad. Ian is right. Every single drug has side effects. Everyone. It is the luck of the draw. They tell you when you pick up a drug at CVS, there are people that have side effects, but your doctor believes that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks. You're told this every single time. And the studies show that most people benefit from these drugs. So lumping is a bad idea.
John.
Thank you for unmuting me. Sorry, I had a call there. But I think that's a all great points. I mean, risk benefit is everything we do in medicine, as Dr. Klauber knows, and Daniel, thank you. I think I want to raise one thing around what you just said, because it was very, very fascinating to me to watch the discourse around the polio vaccine in the last few weeks, to the point of Elizabeth Warren coming out and saying RFK wants to get rid of the polio vaccine. If you look at what actually was going on, a lawyer who had previously worked with RFK Jr. named Aaron Siri had filed a case with a completely different client, unrelated to RFK, looking at one of the 6 available polio vaccines for a specific safety issue with it. There was never anything from RFK Jr. about wanting to get rid of the polio vaccine. And that took off throughout the entire media ecosystem, including senators and congresspeople and every mainstream media outlet. And it just wasn't true. And it is really, really hard in this environment. And that's why this platform is so important, because that particular issue, I think, gained a ton of traction with a ton of people and turned a lot of people off, to your very point, that all vaccines are not created equal. And if he wants to get rid of polio vaccine, of course, like, that's a word. What are we talking about? But he just simply never said that. He's come out and said that.
I have to say, John, one thing I love about you is how calm you are in talking about these topics. It turns my stomach, the story you told. I watched it happen. I couldn't believe. Now, no offense to Congresswoman Hayworth, but I don't hold members of Congress. You say even members of Congress. For me, it's like, well, of course, members of Congress, because that's what they do. But
yeah, but I'm a doctor first.
But, yeah, I know. But for the press,
He's right there, Mark.
Yeah, but for the press, I mean, to just say something not just false, but to undermine the reputations and pollute
But the
the
New
public
York Times
debate.
ran an article.
No,
I think
I
the
know,
New York
I know.
Times, the New York
Yeah, they
Times
did.
ran an article
They
saying
did.
that
They
RFK
did.
wanted to
Very
pull
prominent.
the
I don't know where it was in the hard copy, because what's the hard copy? But it was on the homepage of the website. I couldn't believe it.
I
Could
don't
not
trust
believe it.
the New York Times.
Yeah.
Well, after their Fruit Loops fact check, it was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, there you go.
But I think it's
yeah,
it's an
go
ahead.
example of what people do around so many different issues when it comes to RFK. And if they're
Yeah.
doing it for that one, you at least have to question what else are they doing it for? What other things are we just not being told the truth about? And it's very, very difficult and frustrating as a parent first, as a doctor second, and as a citizen as well.
Yeah.
Well,
Go
RFK
ahead, Nate.
Jr.'s made a lot of assertions, so it's a yeasty field. There's a lot to take as evidence that perhaps we shouldn't trust him terribly much versus, but you know what? In this era, since we are no longer high trust for all the reasons we've been discussing, he has a point there about, again, accountability and transparency. He has explicitly stated, I don't want to take away anybody's vaccines. He has said, I just want to make sure that what we're doing is safe. And given our nation's COVID experience, and yes, the novelty of mRNA vaccines, the questions around myocarditis, the questions around why they're being pushed, my personal question, why they're being pushed on children and infants, when I personally think that's malpractice. So lots of good questions to be asked.
We're a little bit over, but Dean, I want to let you ask your question to the doctors if you can do it quick.
Oh, thank you. Trust is the value that is being tested here more than anything else. So to the doctors, Dr. Niconchuk, Dr. Hayworth, I wanted to find out, did you feel comfortable at the time, or did your colleagues feel comfortable at the time asking questions about the vaccine, COVID vaccine that was being mandated? Did you and your colleagues feel comfortable asking questions, or did you feel pressured to go a different direction?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
one quick thing, could you take me off? I gotta go.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be perfectly honest. At first, this was truly an unknown. We just, as doctors, it was so much unknown. Even the initial management, we put people on ventilators. That was not the correct management. This was initially thought to be a respiratory virus. It's really a micro-inflammatory disease, right? So there was so much unknown. And I, as an anesthesiologist, we were obviously still, I came to work every day during COVID. I mean, a lot of my colleagues were flexed to the ICUs. We were seeing people struggling and families separated and people dying. It was happening. I mean, I don't know how widespread it really was. There's so much that we still don't know about those early months, but there wasn't really, for the people who were in it every day, we weren't really thinking about this, to be perfectly honest. And I can only speak for the group of people right around me. The initial was like, yeah, let's get the vaccine. Let's just get through this, because this is exhausting every single day, going home, coming to work, not knowing the risk profile initially, going home, exposing my kids every day, not knowing they all get COVID. I don't get it. Like, my wife's pregnant. She gets COVID. Like, there was so much uncertainty,
Right.
so emotional. And I mean, my mom she's from Guatemala. She couldn't go see her parents buried, right? Like, it's just so still emotional to talk about. And I think all of that, it was so emotional for so many people. And then on top of that, to have this suspicion of like, and now I don't even know who's telling me the truth from trusted sources. It really was a really despairing time, I think, for a lot of people who were in it and living it and breathing it and still going to work every day during it. So I didn't have a choice initially. I got the first vaccine. I had to get the first vaccine for work. I got the first booster because I had to get it for work. And then that dropped as a requirement. So I didn't get any further. And like I said, my kids, I didn't give it to my kids. And so it is just like, it is still emotional to think about, but it was so much uncertainty that no, I don't think we were thinking in terms that we do now about assessing all of this in the way that I am now.
Dean, great question. And I want to thank Dean and Colette. Thank you all for coming on. Very, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
And love how passionate and calm you are. And that's really what this platform is supposed to be, is to give people a chance to have these conversations. I'll say proudly, not boastfully, we just had a conversation I've not heard anywhere else. And we had it in a very reasoned way. And thanks to the two doctors, Nan and John, thank you so much for being part of it. And as always, we love you coming back. Anytime, any topic. We love having you both here. So thank you.
Honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. We'll
Thanks,
see you soon.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Nan. And David, thank you. We are going to continue to experiment with you live with how this is going to work, and we'll announce the next Diner episode soon. A different topic, but same idea is to let you be exposed to different points of view and different voices. And David, as you said, I'm going to send around in my Substack, put on Twitter links to where you can read the full presentation for this first edition of the Diner, as well as learn more about how WIC is doing the research. David, anything else you want to say?
No, that's great. And any feedback is great. There's an email you can send on how y'all think the show could have gone better to like how, I mean, what was insightful in learning how people feel in this issue. And because, you know, this is our first one and we want to make it really immersive and really get a lot of good insights about it as we continue to move forward. And we'll also put a video of me walking through the slides that we'll get out probably tomorrow for the slides we showed and also the ones that you didn't see. Because sometimes it's easier to watch them unfold.
David, thank you. So grateful. We'll talk soon. Two pieces of news that occurred during our program. Vice President Harris had planned a trip, kind of an unorthodox trip, I thought, in the closing days of the administration. She was going to go to Germany, Singapore, and Bahrain. Her office announced a few minutes ago that's off because of the wildfires in California. And if you didn't think there were enough Fox News talking heads in the Trump administration, settle down, because Leo Terrell, who'd be familiar to any of you who have Fox News and watch it, is going to be the senior counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the Justice Department. So that means one of you can become a Fox News legal analyst if you wish, because Leo is going to be out of the picture for a bit. I made a mistake earlier in the program when I suggested all the living vice presidents were at the memorial for President Carter. Dick Cheney was not there. So I got that wrong. I'm sorry about that, but glad someone was texted me and corrected the record. Very grateful, as I said, to Nan and David and everybody who asked questions. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Sean, Dan, and I will be back for the morning meeting, and we'll be back tomorrow night for another edition of this program. Couldn't be more grateful to folks at WIC for putting all that together and for you all for participating. And stay tuned for more of the Diner coming up soon. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.